A woman could survive hunger, winter, and grief, but erasure was a different predator. Hunger left ribs sharp and breath thin. Winter gnawed fingers raw. Grief hollowed and howled and then, sometimes, quieted. Erasure asked for no blood at all. It asked only for witnesses willing to nod while your name was rubbed out and your life divided like spoils. Alara Stoneheart learned this with ash in her mouth and smoke in her hair. 3 nights after Lucian Stormborn's raiders cut down her husband in the river pass, when her own pack built a pyre in the center yard and fed it with everything that proved she had ever belonged. They burned her winter cloak first. It had taken her 2 months to stitch the wolf fur lining after her wedding, each seam crooked until she learned to keep her hand steady and trust the needle. She watched Elder Brannock toss it into the flames with the same calm he used when measuring grain. Fire took the hem, curled the fur black, then swallowed the sleeves. Her letters went next, tied with blue twine. Notes from her husband, Caden, written in cramped script between patrols. Notes from her mother before fever took her. A folded recipe stained with berry juice. The twine popped, and the pages lifted like pale moths before they darkened and vanished. When they held up her marriage knot, braided silver thread and moongrass, Alara stepped forward without meaning to. 2 guards caught her by the elbows. Their fingers bit hard enough to bruise. "Please," she said, voice scraping. "That is mine." "Was," Brannock corrected, not looking at her. "Dead women hold nothing." The circle of packfolk did not meet her eyes. Some stared at the fire. Some stared at their boots. A few looked directly at her with the stiff, defensive cruelty of people who had already decided their own innocence. At Brannock's nod, Captain Taryn flung the knot into the coals. Heat hit Alara's face. She smelled moongrass oil, then char. Her body reacted before thought could form, twisting against the guards, a sharp cry tearing free. 1 guard muttered an apology under his breath, so quiet it could have been wind. Brannock raised his hand for silence, ceremonial and practiced. By witness and flame, Alara Stoneheart perished in Lucian Stormborn's attack at Greyben Ford. Let this right stand in record. Let no blood debt fall on Stoneheart lands for a woman already taken by war. Taken by war. She stood 10 paces away, soot on her skin, mud to her knees, and they buried her with grammar. Murmurs rippled outward. Agreement, relief. No war, no retaliation, no summons from Lucian demanding the widow tied to a dead patrol leader, no negotiation over the stretch of Cedar Valley Caden had inherited through his mother and passed to her in writing before he rode for Greybend. Land was always the hidden bone inside every ceremony. Ilara pressed her palm to the lower swell beneath her ribs, subtle still, not yet visible under layered wool unless you knew where to look. Caden had laughed when she told him, laughter cracking into disbelieving joy, his forehead pressed to hers beside the kitchen hearth. He had repeated the words 3 times as if saying them aloud would make fate keep them safe. "We are going to have a child." Now she stood while his kin burned the proof of him and renamed her a corpse. By dawn they locked her in the old smokehouse at the edge of the compound, where fish had once hung in summer, and now only damp cedar remained. Her wrists were free, but the barred door held. Someone had slid a blanket through the gap. Someone else had left stale bread in a cup of water. At midday, Mara came. Mara had grown up with Alara, braided her hair before winter festivals, cried in her arms when her first shift went wrong, and left her shaking for hours. She entered with a lantern and shut the door behind her. The yellow light made her face look older than her 25 years. "I argued," Mara whispered, before Alara could speak. It changed nothing. Alara sat on an overturned crate, blanket around her shoulders, knees drawn up for warmth. "What are they doing with Caden's land?" Mara flinched. "They are placing it under council stewardship." "For how long?" Mara did not answer. The silence gave Alara the truth. Permanent then, divided among cousins and elders, parceled under words like stability and necessity. They cannot do that while I live. Mara crouched in front of her. That is why they said you died. Alara laughed once, ragged and sharp enough to hurt. You hear yourself? I hear all of it. Mara's eyes shone but held steady. Brannick says Lucian sent terms. He wants compensation for the raid casualties he claims were ours. He wants names, routes, access to the South Gate Road in spring, and he asked whether Caden left an heir. Cold moved through Alara despite the blanket. What did Brannick answer? That you burned. By the second evening, rumors seeped through the plank walls with each guard change. Lucian scouts had been seen near the Birch Ridge. 2 missing trappers returned and said stormborn wolves were asking for the widow by scent. Brannick denied it in public, then doubled the night watch and posted men near the smokehouse who never looked inside. Alara stopped sleeping. When her eyes closed, Greybend rose behind them. Torches in rain, Caden shouting her name across black water, the crack of spear shafts, the sound he made when he fell. She woke with both hands locked over her belly and her throat raw from swallowing screams. On the third night, the breaking point came, wearing her cousin's voice. Taryn and Brannick stood outside the smokehouse door, speaking in low tones they assumed Wood would swallow. Alara lay on the floor, eyes open, breath held so long her lungs burned. Lucian's messenger returns by moonrise, Taryn said. He asked for proof she is gone. She is gone, Brannick answered. He wants a body, Brannick. A pause. Boots shifted on gravel. We give him one story and one token, Brannick said at last. Her ring, her braid cord. Enough for distance. If he still doubts, we say raiders burned the dead before we reached them. And if he asks for the child? Alara's hand flew to her mouth. Brannick's reply came flat as stone. There is no child if there is no widow. By tomorrow, she will be moved. Quietly. Stormborn territory can sort what remains. Nausea rolled hard and sudden. She pressed her forehead to the boards until the spinning eased. For one suspended moment she understood that hope had narrowed to one physical task. Open door. Find night. Keep moving. Now. Move. Now. If you wait for daylight, you do not leave. She waited until the watch changed, counting heartbeats between footsteps the way Caden had taught her during winter hunts. 12 to the corner post, 8 to the gate. 3 voices tonight, not 4. 1 coughing. The smokehouse roof had a vent hatch warped by years of heat. She had tested it earlier with numb fingers and found one hinge loose. She dragged the crate beneath it, climbed with knees trembling, and pushed. Wood groaned. She froze. No shout came. She pushed again, harder, until the hinge gave with a soft crack. Cold hit her face like river water. Outside, the yard smelled of wet earth, dung, and old smoke. She dropped from the roof into a drift of straw behind the tannery shed, bit the inside of her cheek to silence the cry that rose when her ankle twisted, and stayed crouched until her pulse settled enough to hear. Voices at the main gate, laughter, dice striking wood. She moved the long way, through the dye pits and the abandoned goat pens, keeping low, one hand bracing her belly whenever she had to jump a fence or scramble over stacked timber. At the ash pit, she stopped. The pyre had collapsed into a mound of gray and black, embers long dead. Wind lifted powder that coated her fingers when she knelt and sifted through the remains. Most of it was ruin, charred beads, bent clasp, melted thread. Then her hand closed around 3 smooth shapes, hidden inside a cracked seam of burned wool. Memory stones no bigger than thumbnails, each etched with moon runes that held brief imprints when touched to blood. Caden had stored patrol routes on them once, and the council had ignored them when they burned her things because they looked like river pebbles. She wrapped the stones in a strip torn from her skirt and tied them to the cord around her neck. At the outer palisade, she found what she had prayed for and dreaded. Mara, waiting in shadow near the herb gate, hood pulled low, one mule pack at her feet. Mara did not waste words. She shoved boots, dried meat, a water skin, and a cloak into Alara's arms. The east path is watched. Take the ravine trail north, then cut west at the split pine. Cross the marker stones before dawn, and keep going until you smell iron in the wind. Valewood mines sit under their fortress. If stormborn scouts catch your trail, run downslope. Their wolves hate shale. Ilara stared at her. Come with me. Mara shook her head. Grief and resolve knotted together. If I vanish, they follow. If I stay, I can slow what they send. Her mouth tightened. I am sorry. Don't apologize for surviving, Ilara said, and heard the plea hidden inside it. Mara stepped forward and pressed her forehead to Ilara's for one breath. Old ritual, old love. Prove them wrong, she whispered. Make your name too loud to burn. Ilara slipped through the herb gate and into the dark. The ravine trail carved down between black pines and slick stone. Twice she nearly fell. Once she did, sliding to her knees in freezing runoff that soaked her skirt and turned her fingers wooden. Behind her, somewhere far enough to be uncertain and near enough to be feared, wolves called to one another across the ridgeline. She kept moving. Hours thinned into cold, pain, and breath. Her ankle swelled. A branch tore her palm when she grabbed for balance, and blood marked the bark. She cursed under her breath, wiped her hand on wet moss, and veered onto shale where scent scattered thinner. Dawn grayed the sky by the time she reached the boundary cairns, stacked stones carved with old territorial marks. Stoneheart's wolf head on one side, Valewood's mountain and crescent on the other. She crossed without permission. By late afternoon, the fortress rose from the cliff like part of the mountain itself, walls of dark granite veined with silver ore, banners hanging still in the windless cold. She made it to the outer gate before her legs failed. The world tipped hard left, then narrowed to boots, spears, and startled voices. State your name, a guard demanded. Ilara tried to answer and coughed instead, iron tang on her tongue, ash still under her nails. Name, he repeated, sharper now. She lifted her head. Ilara Stoneheart, she rasped. Silence followed, then the scrape of another set of boots descending the gate stairs with controlled, unhurried weight. He came into view in a dark cloak lined with wolf fur, broad-shouldered, severe, his presence hitting the courtyard like the edge of winter. Darius Valewood, the alpha king of the northern range, studied her ash-marked hands, the ripped hem, the blood drying on her palm, the stubborn line of her mouth. When he spoke, his voice was low and exact. They say you are dead, Ilara Stoneheart. Prove it. Ilara held his gaze because dropping it felt too close to kneeling, and she had been forced to kneel enough for one lifetime. Wind scraped through the gate teeth and lifted the loose hair at her temples. Every muscle in her body shook with cold and overuse, but she got one boot under her, then the other, and rose in stages until she stood in front of him instead of on the stones. If I were dead, she said, voice frayed raw, your guards would be talking to a ghost. No one laughed. The spear line tightened by instinct, steel heads angling a breath lower as if audacity itself could be a weapon. Darius Valewood did not move. Up close, he looked less like the stories and more dangerous than them, not because of size alone, though he had that, but because he held stillness like a blade held flat in open hands. His hair was dark with a seam of silver at one temple. A faint scar crossed his jaw. His eyes were a winter brown that gave nothing away. Ghosts do not bleed, he said. Ilara swallowed copper and lifted her torn palm. Dried blood had crusted in the lines, black-red against ash. I can provide more, One of the gate captains made a disbelieving sound. Alpha, this is a Stoneheart matter. If Stormborn scouts are on her trail, harboring her brings Lucian to our walls. Darius turned his head slightly, and the captain went silent as if struck. You are speaking over my guest. Guest. The word landed in Alara's chest with painful force. Not comfort. Not yet, but an opening where there had only been walls. He looked back at her. Can you walk to the inner court without collapsing? Her pride answered first. Yes. Her legs answered second. They buckled hard enough that the nearest guard lunged forward. Alara flinched, hand flying to the cord at her throat, where the memory stones rested under her dress, and pain lit behind her eyes in a white flare. A broad hand appeared in her line of sight, palm up, empty. Choose, Darius said quietly. Lean on me or crawl. I will not carry you unless you ask. The choice mattered in a way she did not understand yet, but she felt it. An offered boundary clean as cut glass. She hesitated one beat, then placed her wrist in his hand. Heat moved through the contact. Simple body warmth, nothing mystical, just enough to tell her how deeply chilled she had become. He did not grip. He steadied. They crossed beneath the gate arch together, and Valewood opened around her in slate, smoke, and disciplined motion. The fortress climbed the mountain in terraces linked by stone ramps. Watchfires burned in iron braziers that smelled of pine resin instead of tallow. Wolves in human form and half-shift moved with practiced economy, hauling crates, checking bowstrings, saluting their king with fist to chest as he passed. No one stared openly, but she felt their attention like sleet on skin. At the first switchback, she heard it. Distant howls, thin from far ridges, answering one another in coded intervals. Scouts. Stormborn or Valewood, she could not tell. Darius heard it too, his head tilted, listening to patterns beyond her reach. Then he signaled a sentry without breaking stride. West Ridge flares, he ordered. Double river watch. No pursuit beyond marker stones without my word. The sentry ran. By the time they reached the inner court, Alara's breath came in hard pulls. A healer stepped forward with a satchel, gray braids swinging, and Darius stopped her with 2 fingers lifted. Name first, he said. Treatment after witness. The healer frowned but dipped her head. As you command. He turned Alara toward a set of carved doors banded in black iron. Moon phases had been worked into the wood, full to crescent to dark and back again, an old reminder that power moved in cycles whether rulers liked it or not. 2 guards pulled them open. Warmth hit her face from within, carrying beeswax, cedar, wet wool, and the mineral scent of polished stone. The great hall was wider than Stoneheart's entire council yard. A central hearth burned low, banked for control, not spectacle. Long tables had been pushed back, leaving a circle of pale moonstone tiles inlaid at the center. Elders, captains, and stewards gathered in fast-forming ranks, summoned by runners. She caught fragments in their expressions: curiosity, suspicion, calculation, one woman's open pity. Darius released her wrist only when she stood within the moonstone ring. This is Alara Stoneheart, he said, voice carrying clean to every corner. Stoneheart records list her dead. She claims otherwise, and seeks sanctuary under North law. A narrow-faced elder in dark green stepped forward. North law does not bind us to provoke Stormborn because one stranger arrives with a dramatic story. I did not ask what North law binds, Darius replied. I stated it. The elder's mouth tightened. Then verify her, publicly. Alara pulled the strip of cloth from beneath her collar with numb fingers and unwrapped the 3 memory stones into her palm. Gasps rippled through the nearest ranks at the old runes etched into each pebble. She raised them shoulder high. These were in the pyre with my things, she said. If I lied, why keep evidence they missed? The elder glanced at Darius, then away, unsettled for reasons Alara could not parse. Darius studied the stones, and for the first time his restraint showed a crack. Not in fear, but in focused interest. You will keep those on your person, he said. No one touches them without your consent. Not even me. The hall shifted at that, a subtle recalibration of status. Alara felt it in the way shoulders squared and chins lowered. He had not granted trust. He had granted procedural respect in front of witnesses, and it carried nearly as much weight. A basin was set at the ring's edge. A novice placed a ritual blade on a folded cloth beside it, silver narrow as a willow leaf. Darius stepped into the circle opposite Alara and held out his hand for the blade. The novice gave it to him with both palms and backed away. This rite confirms 3 things, he said to her, but loudly enough for the room. Name, bloodline, and present life. It does not bind allegiance. It does not claim your body. It does not alter existing vows. Do you consent? The question hit her harder than the cold had. In Stoneheart, rites were announced, not offered. She nodded once, then found her voice. I consent. Darius tilted the blade toward her. Then prove what they burned cannot be burned. Alara took it, turned her hand palm up above the moonstone tile, and drew steel across skin. Pain flashed bright and immediate. Blood welled, then fell in dark beads onto pale stone. The runes beneath her feet drank color and gave back light, thin silver lines branching outward like frost over glass. A murmur moved through the hall. The moonstone answered a living claimant. Relief should have come. Instead, dizziness surged. Too little food, too much blood loss, too many nights with no sleep. The edges of the room blurred. The blade tipped in her fingers. Darius moved. He caught her wrist just above the cut, steadying, not restraining. His thumb pressed lightly to the pulse point inside her arm, and the world detonated. Heat slammed up through Alara's hand, through her forearm, into her chest in a violent rush that had nothing to do with fever or fear. It felt like an old lock turning from the inside, like winter river ice splitting under hidden current. Her breath snagged. Every scent in the hall dropped away until only 3 remained, sharp and absolute. Rain on stone, iron, and him. Across from her, Darius inhaled as if struck. His shoulders went rigid. The winter brown of his eyes altered in one visible sweep, amber bleeding through the iris until something ancient looked out from behind the human mask. His pupils narrowed, then widened. A low sound started in his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a word. Someone at the edge of the ring whispered, "Alpha?" He did not answer. Alara could not either. The pull between their joined skin became a living thing, urgent, disorienting, threading through nerve and bone with terrifying recognition. Her instincts sharpened to a knife edge. The animal part of her went alert, every inner alarm and longing sparking at once. No, not now, not this. Her thoughts broke into present tense fragments, raw and immediate, as if her mind could only speak in declarations. I am carrying Caden's child. I am standing in another king's hall. I cannot want this. I cannot survive this. His scent is everywhere, and I am drowning in it. If this is fate, it is cruel. If this is desire, it is betrayal. If this is the mate bond, the goddess has no mercy at all. Do not lean closer. Do not breathe him in. Do not let your pulse answer his. But her pulse did answer, matching his in a ruthless, intimate rhythm she had never invited. Darius's voice came roughened, each word forced through control. Release the circle. No one moved. He looked past Alara to his counsel, amber still burning in his eyes. Now. The novice stumbled forward to break the rite with salt and water. As the moonstone lines dimmed, the pressure eased by degrees, but did not disappear. It remained between them, invisible and undeniable, a drawn wire humming under skin. Darius loosened his hold on her wrist with deliberate care, as if sudden distance might tear something not yet formed. Blood from her palm had marked his fingers. He stared at it for half a heartbeat, then met her eyes again, and the feral edge in his gaze softened into something more dangerous than hunger. Reverence shot through with fear. Alara had seen fear in men before, in raiders and cowards and grieving sons. She had never seen it like this, wrapped around protectiveness so absolute it changed the air. The elder in green found her voice first. Alpha King, this is politically untenable. She is widowed, pregnant, and hunted. A bond claim would fracture every treaty we have with the eastern clans. Darius did not look away from Alara. I made no claim. Your wolf did. His jaw flexed. My wolf is not the crown. The elder's reply came quick, sharp. Your crown is not stronger than blood fate. Alara's knees threatened again, less from weakness now than from the weight of a future she had not agreed to, and could already feel gathering like a storm front. She wiped her cut hand on her skirt, leaving a dark streak, and forced herself to stand straight. I did not cross your border for a mate, she said, voice clear enough to carry. I crossed it because my pack pronounced me dead and sold my name to a killer. Whatever that was, it does not erase why I am here. At last Darius inclined his head, formal and unflinching. Then we proceed with why you are here. He turned to the hall, and command settled over him like armor locking into place. Alara Stoneheart is under provisional sanctuary pending full council at dawn. Any threat to her is a threat to my authority. Any contact with Stormborn regarding her is treason. The room erupted in overlapping protest and stunned silence. Darius lifted one hand and cut through both. Captain Ivor, seal the north and west approaches. Healer Senna, treat her injuries and monitor the pregnancy. Scribe Tal, record every word spoken in this hall from the moment she entered. He looked back at Alara one more time, and the bond answered with a low thrum under her ribs, frightening in its certainty. You asked to be believed, he said softly, for her alone despite the crowded room. You are. Now we keep you alive long enough to make the world admit it. The hall did not settle after his command. It fractured into pockets of argument, the scrape of benches, captains moving at a near run while Scribe Tal tried to keep pace with ink and breath. Alara remained in the moonstone ring with her cut palm open, feeling the pulse at her wrist where Darius had touched her, as if her body had become a map she no longer knew how to read. Healer Senna approached with a basin and clean cloth, but she paused at the ring's edge and waited for Alara's nod before stepping in. That small courtesy almost undid her. Senna rinsed the cut, packed it with crushed yarrow and resin, then wrapped it in linen with hands that had done this for decades and still remembered gentleness. You need food, heat, and sleep, Senna said. In that order. Alara almost laughed. Sleep had become a battlefield she lost nightly. Darius gave 3 more orders in low tones to Captain Ivor, then came back to her side. The amber had receded from his gaze, but not entirely. It waited there, banked, like fire under iron. You will have rooms in the East Keep, he said. 2 guards outside. Women from the healer wing inside if you ask. No one else enters without your consent. Not even you? The question escaped before she decided to ask it. His expression did not change, yet something tightened behind it. Not even me. They left the great hall through a side passage where the fortress quieted into stone, torchlight, and the distant metallic rhythm of the mines below. Alara's steps dragged by the second stairwell. By the third, shame burned hotter than fatigue. She hated being watched while weak, hated the way her body had become an inventory of limits. At the East Keep threshold, Darius stopped and faced the two posted guards. If she says no, it is no. If she says leave, you leave. If anyone uses my name to cross this door against her will, you treat it as a lie until I speak to you myself. Both guards thumped fists to chests. Yes, Alpha King. Inside, the chamber was simple and unexpectedly warm, with woven rugs, a narrow hearth, and a bed piled high with winter quilts. A small table stood by the window with bread, broth, and a copper kettle steaming. Someone had thought ahead. Someone had believed she might live long enough to need ordinary things. Darius remained near the door while Senna checked Ilara's ankle and pressed a listening horn to her lower abdomen. The baby's heartbeat answered, quick and steady. Ilara closed her eyes at the sound and had to bite down on the sudden ache in her throat. Strong, Senna said quietly, meeting her gaze. You both are. When Senna left, Darius still had not crossed the midpoint of the room. You should eat, he said. Ilara lowered herself to the chair by the hearth. Her hand shook around the spoon. Halfway through the broth, her vision swam. She set the bowl down and stared at the flames until they blurred into Greybend rain. She did not remember deciding to speak. My husband's blood was on my sleeves when they burned them. Silence held for one breath, then two. Darius answered from where he stood, voice level and unadorned. I know. No, you do not. The words came sharp, then cracked. You know war. You know loss. You do not know what it is to stand in your own yard while your elders call you dead so they can keep your land. He absorbed it without flinch or interruption. You are right. I do not know that wound. Something in her wanted him to argue so she could hate him cleanly. He did not. I know another one, he said after a moment. I know what it is to be used as proof of stability while men in council decide which life is expendable this season. I built this fortress to end that habit. Not perfectly. Not yet. But I did build it. She looked up then, really looked, and saw the old scar along his jaw, the sleepless strain at the corners of his eyes, the discipline of a man who had trained every instinct toward control because one breach might cost a province. Why restraint? She asked before she could stop herself. In the hall, with that. The bond between them stirred at the word, a low, living current. Darius braced one hand on the doorframe, as if keeping distance required force. Because power without consent is just a prettier name for violence, he said. Because you arrived hunted, grieving, and exhausted, and fate does not get to overrule your no. His mouth tightened. And because I have spent years learning what my wolf wants, is not always what my kingdom can survive. That answer landed deep enough to hurt. By midnight, the fortress had gone to its colder, watchful quiet, and the wind along the arrow slits sounded like a hand dragged across a drum. Ilara lay down fully clothed, one palm over her belly, and told herself she would only close her eyes for a minute. The nightmare took her whole. She was back at Greybend, but the river was black glass and every face on the bank wore Brenick's calm. Caden called from the far side, mouth moving without sound, while flames climbed the water as if fire had learned to swim. She ran, and the ground turned to ash that swallowed her ankles. Hands reached from the smokehouse dark, pulling. The baby kicked once, hard, and then there was no heartbeat at all. Ilara came awake with a strangled cry, lungs seizing, nails digging into her own skin through the wool of her dress. The room was dark except for banked coals. For one blind instant she did not know where she was, only that she had to get to the floor, to the corner, to any place no one could touch her. A knock sounded, soft and measured. Ilara, it is Darius. May I enter? Her throat worked around air that felt too thin. She could not answer, could not make language. He waited. Another breath. Another. Then, if you cannot speak, tap once for yes, twice for no. She forced her hand to move, one tap against the bed frame. He entered alone and stopped 3 paces in, hands visible, posture lowered just enough to be less threatening. He took in the overturned stool, the torn hem where she had stumbled, the panic she could not hide. "I am staying here," he said. "No closer, unless you ask." She shook violently, humiliation and terror tangled tight. He crouched by the hearth instead of approaching her, and fed the coals until flame returned. Then he set a kettle over the hook and warmed water in silence. Present tense thoughts tore through her in jagged sequence, immediate as pain. "I am not safe. I am in a stranger's keep. I cannot breathe, cannot think, cannot stop seeing fire on water. If he comes closer, I might strike him. If he leaves, I might break apart. I hate that I need anyone. I hate that I am relieved he knocked first. My child is alive. My child is alive. Keep that one truth. Hold it. Do not drown in old smoke. Do not drown now." When the kettle steamed, Darius poured water into a shallow basin and placed it on the rug halfway between them. He removed his gloves and set them beside it, then looked to her and waited. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "You were shivering even before the dream. Your feet are ice." His gaze stayed on her face, not her body. "May I help?" The question opened a space where panic had filled everything. She managed a nod. He moved slowly, kneeling at her feet as if before an altar he did not presume to claim. With a cloth dipped in warm water, he washed soot and dried blood from her heels and arches, careful around the swollen ankle, pausing whenever she flinched. No seduction lived in the gesture, no debt. It felt like an oath made in actions instead of words. "You are not a burden. You are not spoil. You are still a person." Heat returned by painful increments. So did breath. When he finished, he wrapped her feet in clean wool and stood. "Try to sleep again." "Stay," she said, then startled at herself. His eyes softened, and that near-feral attention flickered once behind restraint. "I will stay outside your door. In wolf form. You will hear me breathing." He kept his promise. Through the thick wood and the slow drift of hours, Alara listened to the steady rumble of his sleeping breath in the corridor, huge and unmistakable, and realized that gentleness could feel more dangerous than cruelty, because cruelty asked for endurance, while gentleness asked for hope. At dawn, a runner summoned them to council. The chamber was narrower than the great hall, but sharper with power. A crescent table of dark oak under carved moon phases. Elders in formal cloaks sat to the left and right, captains along the wall, scribes behind them. The air carried ink, cedar, and the metallic edge of fear concealed as procedure. Alara entered beside Darius, but 1 pace back, by habit more than instruction. Conversations thinned. Elder Branth, the narrow-faced counselor from the previous night, rose before anyone invited him. "Alpha King, we begin under protest," Branth said. "Harboring this woman has already drawn Stormborn scouts to our western ridge. We received a courier at first light offering terms if she is surrendered before the eclipse." A folded parchment sealed in red wax lay on the table. Alara's stomach turned at the sight of Stormborn's sigil pressed deep into the wax like a wound. Darius did not sit. "Read it." Branth lifted the letter. "Lucian Stormborn offers cessation of raids against Valewood civilians in exchange for the return of Alara Stoneheart. He further states she is complicit in the death of her husband and a fugitive from Stoneheart justice. In recognition of cooperation, he promises grain transit through eastern passes." Murmurs rolled through the chamber. Grain transit. Winter leverage. Political poison wrapped as relief. Captain Ivor spoke first, controlled but hard. "We cannot take Lucian's word as law." Councillor Esel, silver-haired and thin as wire, tapped 2 fingers on the table. "We do not need his word to see risk. One stranger arrives and our borders ignite. Sanctuary is not suicide. Alara felt every gaze turn toward her, weighing her body as if it were a map of possible famine. Then Branth delivered the cut cleanly. And her unborn child is not Valewood blood. Why should our people bleed for another male's heir? The room went still enough to hear the scrape of Darius's ring against wood as he finally sat, then rose again in one fluid motion. When he let his authority unfurl, it was not loud. It was pressure, ancient and absolute, dropping through the chamber like a storm front. Wolves lowered their eyes by instinct. Even humans in service ranks swayed back a half step, breath catching as the alpha force filled every corner and left no space for challenge. Darius's voice was quiet, which made it more final. Her child is under my protection. Branth opened his mouth. Darius cut him off with a look that could have shattered stone. You will not reduce a life to blood accounting in my council. You will not barter a widow to purchase temporary peace. Sanctuary law is clear. Any threat against one under my protection is a direct challenge to my crown. Isel tried a different angle. Then this is no longer sanctuary, this is personal. Yes, Darius said. No denial, no retreat. It is personal and sovereign, which is why you will hear the rest carefully. We are not surrendering Alara Stoneheart. We are preparing a legal and military response to Stormborn coercion. Scribe Tal. Record that any clan accepting Lucian's gold to denounce Asylum will forfeit treaty privileges for 7 years. The command rippled outward into stunned silence. He turned then, not to the table, but to Alara. In front of every elder and captain, he stepped down from the dais, crossed the chamber, and offered his hand exactly as he had at the gate. Palm up, empty. Stand where you are owed, he said. Her heart hit hard against her ribs. She could refuse. She understood that. The choice remained hers, and that was the point. Slowly, aware of every watching eye, she put her hand in his. He led her to the right side of his chair, the place of highest trust, where only kin by oath or mate by bond stood during ruling sessions. Gasps broke, despite discipline. Branth's face went pale with fury he could not voice. Darius faced the room with Alara at his right hand. You asked my position. This is my position. For the first time since Greybend, Alara did not feel like cargo being moved between stronger hands. She felt the knot behind her ribs loosen by one guarded measure. Not healed. Not safe in every way, but seen and defended without being possessed. When Darius's fingers brushed hers before he let go, the bond answered with a quiet, steady thrum, and she did not pull away. She did not pull away, and the chamber seemed to understand that this was not surrender, but declaration. Branth's chair scraped backward with a harsh wooden cry. If this is to be theater, he said, at least call it theater. You place her there and expect the Eastern clans to pretend they do not see a bond in progress. Lucian will use this before sunset. Lucian already is, Darius replied. The doors opened behind the council table before Branth could answer. A mud-streaked runner stumbled in, knelt, and held up a leather satchel stamped with Stormborn's wolf sigil. Captain Ivor took it, loosened the ties, and tipped its contents across the oak. Clipped gold discs, each marked with Lucian's crescent claw crest, and 6 folded letters sealed in dark red wax. Ivor read the first, and his mouth hardened. Payment agreements to clan heads in Birch Run, East Hollow, and 2 river enclaves. Terms for public denunciation of Valewood sanctuary law. Isel reached for another letter. Read it aloud. Ivor did. By Moon Witness, we declare Alara Stoneheart complicit in traitor blood and hostile to pack order. We denounce the Valewood Crown for harboring cursed issue and invite corrective action before eclipse. A current went through the room, fear wearing legal language like a mask. Alara felt it in her bones. This was not rage. This was architecture. Darius looked to Tal. Record every name attached. Tal's pen scratched furiously. Ivor opened the final packet and went still. There is more. He passed the parchment to Darius, who read it once, then held it out to Alara. The script was crafted to resemble hers, tight and slanted, but the strokes were too careful, as if copied from memory by someone who feared getting caught. I, Alara Stoneheart, did conspire to remove Caden Stoneheart from succession. The rest blurred beneath a surge of nausea and cold precision. A forged confession, complete with a replica of her household seal pressed into black wax. That seal was burned with my belongings, she said. Or taken before the fire, Darius said, which means planning began before Greybend. Branth folded his arms, voice brittle with forced control. Planning by whom? You assume Stormborn because you prefer an external enemy. Alara turned to him. Who profits if I am dead on paper and guilty in ink? No one answered. They did not need to. Darius's gaze stayed on Branth a beat too long to be accidental, then shifted back to the table. Lucian's objective is not my walls. It is my legitimacy. If enough clans call sanctuary corruption, they can refuse levy, withhold grain, and claim I broke Northlaw first. Then when he strikes, he calls it restoration. He tapped the forged confession with one knuckle. Strategic and personal. He wants me kneeling to his terms in front of my own council. The runner, still breathing hard, raised a shaking hand. Alpha King, there was one more thing. A rumor spread through the lower terraces before I left Westwatch, that taking in a widow under false blood brings moon curse to livestock and barren fields. They are saying the mountain will not thaw in spring. Isel swore softly. Branth did not. Darius rose. Ivor, quarantine this evidence in the archive vault under dual seal. Tal, dispatch verified copies to every treaty clan with my challenge appended. Senna, no one with Stormborn sent past the inner ward. Branth, you will remain available for formal inquiry. Branth's chin lifted. Inquiry into what? Into who in this room received Stormborn gold first, Darius said. No one spoke after that. The silence had weight. Alara kept her face still, but inside, a map assembled itself with brutal clarity. Forged confession, purchased denunciations, famine prophecy, pressure before eclipse. Lucian did not need to win one battle if he could make every decision around her look like treason. He wanted her to become a solvent poured into Valewood's foundations until stone split from within. When council broke, Darius did not touch her until they reached the corridor and she gave a single nod. Then he steadied her elbow as they descended toward the archive wing, where old law tablets were kept in iron cages cut into bedrock. Scribe Tal walked 3 paces behind with the satchel. May I see it again? Alara asked. The forgery. Tal glanced to Darius, received permission, and handed it over. She traced the false curves of her own name and felt anger settle into something colder than fury. Focus. The pen lift before Stoneheart, she murmured. Whoever did this practiced my first name, not the full signature. They copied from kitchen notes or ledger scraps, not formal records. Darius watched her profile with sharpened attention. Can you identify the hand? Not yet, but I can identify the lie. She folded the parchment carefully. Lucian did not invent this alone. He had Stoneheart help. By the 4th evening after the council, the fortress had learned to live at siege tempo without calling it siege. Torches stayed lit through dawn. Smiths slept in shifts beside cooling racks. Scouts returned with mud to their knees and coated scratches on birch bark. And every sunset, another rumor arrived from beyond the ridge. Plague, curse, crop blight, barren mates, dead pups in spring dens if Valewood kept a false widow under moon law. Alara sat in the map room with Darius, while rain combed the narrow windows in silver lines. Between them lay the 3 memory stones she had pulled from ash, set in a triangle on dark wool. Senna had shown her how to reactivate archived imprints safely. Blood at the edge, moonlight over the rune cut, then contact. She nicked her thumb, touched the first stone, and an image shimmered above it, pale as breath on glass. Caden at a planning table, jaw tense, pointing to Greybend crossings. A second figure partly in shadow, Brannick's ring on the figure's hand. Then Lucian's voice, unmistakable, even distorted by the stone's age. Keep her out of record until the pass is mine. The image collapsed. Darius exhaled once, controlled and lethal. That is admissible in high tribunal. Not in Stoneheart's own court, Alara said. Brannick buried 2 judges last winter and called it fever. Rain struck harder. The room smelled of wet slate, cedar oil, and the metallic tang of blood from the stonework. She became aware of Darius's hand near hers on the table, not touching, simply present, heat close enough to register. Present tense thought rose in her with frightening immediacy. I am tired enough to lean and frightened enough not to. I want this steadiness and resent needing it. I remember Caden's laugh, and I refuse to erase it to make room for what is happening now. The bond does not ask permission from grief. It arrives anyway, relentless as weather. If I step closer, I betray the woman I was. If I step away, I betray the woman I am becoming. I do not know how to carry both and still stand. But I am standing. I am still here. I am not Ash. I am not a name crossed out in someone else's ledger. She closed her hand before it could tremble. Darius spoke without looking up. You are allowed to choose pace. She almost smiled at the austerity of that promise. Is that a royal decree? It is survival strategy, he said, for both of us. A brief sound escaped her, half laugh, half disbelief, the first unguarded note he had heard from her. It lasted only a second and changed the room. Then the door opened and Captain Ivor entered, rain on his cloak and a sealed strip of hide in his palm. Message from Stoneheart Interior, he said, intercepted at a smuggler's marker, addressed to Alara by Old Braid Code. Alara's pulse jumped. Mara. She broke the seal, 2 lines only written in hurried charcoal. Brannick took silver from Stormborn before Greybend. He gave route maps and your household seal. Leave no witness alive if they corner you. Mara's mark, a tiny knot of 3 crossed threads, sat at the bottom. Alara passed the strip to Darius. She is still alive. Then we get her out, he said. We cannot send a full unit. Brannick will smell a raid and kill every trail. Darius considered, then nodded once. 2 shadow scouts only. Quiet extraction. He looked to Ivor. Choose wolves who owe no one east of our ridge. Ivor left at once. The rain stopped near midnight, and a thin moon laid silver over the fortress roofs. Alara had just reached the East Keep corridor when the first alarm bell rang from the western terrace. 1 strike, 2, then continuous iron thunder. She turned toward the stairwell on instinct. A guard moved to block her, and she cut him off with a look. Do not cage me in my own rescue. The second bell answered from the lower granary. Shouts rose in overlapping bursts. Smoke drifted up the stair shaft, not thick yet, but sharp enough to sting. Darius appeared at the landing above, already in partial shift. Canines lengthened, pupils narrowed, command blazing through every line of him. Inner ward now, he ordered. Tell me what happened. Decoy fires at West Stores. Gate team reports masked wolves among supply carts. Inside the walls. Yes. They ran together down the inner steps, boots striking stone in hard rhythm. In the lower passage, they found 2 sentries unconscious, breathing but bound with dyed cord marked by stormborn knots. Not a raid. An insertion. At Alara's chamber door, the lock was splintered. Darius pushed the door inward and halted. The room had been turned with surgical speed. Mattress cut open, trunk emptied, hearth bricks pried loose. On the floor near the window lay her spare dress, slashed at the hem. The memory stones were gone from the table where she had left them wrapped in wool. A low vibration moved through Darius's chest, more felt than heard. Ilara crossed to the window. On the sill sat a small obsidian vial sealed with blood wax and a folded strip of parchment pinned beneath it by a silver nail. Her name was written in Lucian's hand. She opened it while Darius checked the corridor. Widow, I can burn your proof faster than you can speak it. Come to the ancient stone circle before eclipse and kneel, or I feed your mountain a season of graves, one caravan at a time. Come with no army and I spare civilians. Refuse, and every death from here to spring is yours. Bring the king if you want him broken in public. Ilara read it twice, then held out the obsidian vial. Inside, suspended in dark oil, were powdered rune fragments from one of her memory stones. Not all. One had been crushed as warning. Two remained somewhere in the fortress, in enemy hands, while fire bells still rang and traitors moved through her halls. Darius returned to her side, eyes gone feral with contained violence. He wants you cornered by guilt. He also wants witnesses, she said. That means he thinks he can still win politically. A third bell began, deeper than the others, the signal for breach at an inner gate. Voices surged below, then the unmistakable crash of timber bar against stone. Ivor's shout carried up the stairwell. Alpha King, East Postern compromised. Branth is missing. The world narrowed to two truths. Lucian had reached through their walls, and someone inside had opened the hand that held the knife. Ilara folded the letter once, precise and calm despite the shaking in her fingers, and met Darius's gaze as the fortress lurched toward open collapse. Darius did not waste the breath between alarm bells. Ivor! He shouted into the stairwell, voice carrying like struck iron. Seal the inner ward and take Branth alive if you can. Ilara stays with me. Ilara folded Lucian's letter and tucked it inside her sleeve. I am done staying behind doors. Then stay beside me, he said, already moving. They descended into smoke-laced corridors where servants rushed water skins toward the west terraces, and armed wolves sprinted the opposite direction, half-shifted for speed. The fortress had turned into a maze of collision and command, every torch flare throwing jagged shadows over stone. At the lower landing they found Captain Ivor with 6 guards, blood on one man's brow, fury held together by discipline. East Postern Bar was cut from inside, Ivor reported. 3 dead infiltrators, 2 escaped into the archive wing, Branth not in his quarters, and someone tried the vault seals. Tal's voice rose from behind him, breathless. Dual seal held, nothing removed. A howl split the corridor, close enough to rattle Ilara's ribs, not a signal. A challenge. Darius's pupils narrowed, the predator surfacing through his control. Formation. 2 ranks. We clear the archive first. They reached the archive gallery at a run and found one door smashed inward. Tablets shattered underfoot, wax records burning in a guttering line where oil had been poured. Ilara dropped to one knee in the debris and sifted through scorched cloth until her fingers closed around a familiar piece of wool. Empty. The bundle that had held the stones had been cut open and discarded. Bootsteps thundered from the side passage. A masked wolf lunged out of the smoke with a hooked blade aimed at Ilara's throat, and Darius hit him at full force before steel landed, driving him hard into the wall. The attacker slashed wild, clipped Darius's shoulder, then tried to break for the gallery stairs. Ilara seized a fallen spear shaft and swung low into his knee. Bone cracked with a dull snap. He dropped. Ivor's guards pinned him face down and tore away the mask. Stone heart markings. Branth's household guard. The man spat blood and laughed through split lips. Too late. He has her proof and your council seal. He has your king by dawn. Where? Darius said, every syllable edged. Circle, the guard rasped. Eclipse. He bit down on something hidden in his molars and convulsed. Senna's aides shoved forward, pried his jaw open, and cursed. "Poison pellet," one said. "He will not answer again." Across the gallery, another door slammed. Darius and Ivor hit it shoulder first and burst into the old map vault. Branth stood at the far table, cloak thrown back, one arm locked around a young archive clerk with a knife to her ribs. In his free hand, he held a leather tube capped in silver. Ilara recognized the etching at once. Moonstone transport case, built to carry memory stones without degrading the imprint. Branth smiled, thin and fever-bright. "Do not take one more step. I drop her, I break this case, and the only admissible witness dies with both." The clerk trembled but stayed upright, eyes huge. Darius lowered his center of gravity, voice calm enough to freeze water. "Release her, and you live to stand inquiry." Branth's laugh was almost gentle. "Inquiry is for men who still believe in courts. Lucian pays in outcomes." He looked past Darius to Ilara. "You should have stayed dead." Ilara met his gaze and moved one pace left, just enough to enter his peripheral blind side. "If you hand me the case, I ask for sentence instead of execution." Branth's focus snapped to her. "Listen to her. Already ruling my fate." The clerk used that heartbeat. She stamped her heel down on Branth's instep and threw her weight backward. The knife slipped. Darius crossed the room in 2 strides and tore Branth away from her. They crashed into the table, maps scattering like leaves. Branth slashed once, shallow across Darius's forearm, then bolted toward the service arch with the silver case tucked to his chest. Ilara ran after him through a narrow records passage that stank of smoke and lamp oil. Branth glanced back, misjudged the turn, and clipped a stone pillar. The silver case flew from his grip and skidded across the floor to Ilara's boots. She grabbed it, hugged it tight, and stumbled as Branth slammed into her shoulder. Pain shot down her arm. He reached for her throat. Darius hit him from behind, locked both arms, and dragged him down. Ivor arrived with irons and snapped them shut around Branth's wrists. "He is secured." Branth twisted on the floor, face mottled with rage. "You think killing Lucian ends this? Clans already took his gold. Rumor outruns law." Ilara held the case to her chest and looked down at him. "Then I will outrun rumor." By the time they hauled Branth to the inner cells, the moon had begun to darken, and the fortress drums had shifted from breach cadence to war call. Darius barred the strategy chamber door behind them. "No, we do not walk into his chosen ground." "We do," Ilara said, "because he has made me the hinge of this war, and if I stay hidden, every clan says you sheltered a lie. You are carrying a child. I am carrying evidence." She set the silver case on the table and opened it. 2 memory stones gleamed inside, soot-marked but intact. "He wanted these in public. So do I." Ivor swore softly. "Alpha King, scouts report stormborn lines already moving toward the ancient circle. If we wait, he frames it as refusal." Ilara turned to Darius and spoke low, fast, precise, leaving no room for comfort. "I go to the parley ring. I stand where every witness can see me alive. I break the stones myself and project the truth before either side can silence it. You hold the outer perimeter with Ivor and do not cross the inner ring unless I call. I can lock Moonstone with bloodline command from my mother's line. Stoneheart taught daughters the right in famine years to seal grain vaults against raiders. Brannick never cared to learn women's law. Lucian will not expect it." Darius stared at her, conflict burning plain across his face. "If he rushes you, I will tear him apart, and damned be the optics. If you strike first, he dies a martyr. If he attacks inside a sealed ring after public witness, he dies condemned." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. "Trust me to finish what they started when they burned my name." For one taut breath he said nothing. Then he took her hand, pressed a short ritual blade into her palm and closed her fingers around it. You call, and I come. No delay. No heroics beyond the plan. A jagged smile touched her mouth despite everything. That was almost an order. It was terror disguised as strategy. They reached the ancient stone circle as Eclipse shadow swallowed half the moon. Torches ringed the clearing in violent gold. Two armies spread in crescents beyond the carved boundary stones. Valewood banners snapped on one side, Stormborn's crescent claw on the other. Wolves paced at the edges in human skin and half-form, restless with blood and fear and spectacle. Lucien Stormborn waited inside the ring in black leather and wolf fur, tall and immaculate, silver at his throat catching the dimming light. His gaze found Alara and sharpened with triumph. You came, he called. I knew guilt would do what loyalty could not. Alara stepped over the circle line alone, memory stones in her left hand, ritual blade in her right. Darius halted at the boundary with Ivor and 3 captains, shoulders set like a wall. Lucien opened his arms to the gathered packs. Witness this, a false widow carried into a crown hall on seduction and panic. Return her and I withdraw from Valewood roads by dawn. Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Alara raised her voice, clear and cutting. Witness this instead. She sliced her thumb, smeared blood over the first memory stone rune, and hurled it to the center slab. Moonlight struck blood. The image flared above them, huge and undeniable. Caden at the Greyben table, Brannick's ringed hand in shadow, Lucien's own voice promising passage in exchange for silence and land. Gasps broke from both ranks. Someone shouted Brannick's name. Lucien's expression flickered, then hardened. Forgery! Alara crushed the second stone under her heel. A new projection burst upward. Gold changing hands in Branth's chamber, Stormborn seals stamped onto denunciation letters, names read aloud by men now standing in the crowd, pale and exposed. Panic rippled through Lucien's left flank. 2 clan heads backed away from his banner. Alara planted her bleeding palm on the moonstone seam and spoke in old Stoneheart cadence, each word ringing against carved rock. By blood recorded and witness bound, I seal this ring against the traitor named Lucien Stormborn. No step leaves until judgment. Silver fire raced through the carved channels in a widening circle, then snapped upright in waist-high arcs. Lucien lunged for the boundary and slammed into invisible force, thrown back to one knee. His face changed. The civilized mask dropped. His canines lengthened, jaw distorting as he shifted into a massive wolf with dark fur and amber eyes gone feral with hate. He hit the circle again, then wheeled and charged straight for Alara. She held her ground and dragged the blade across her palm a second time, feeding the seal. Pain flashed white. The silver arc surged higher. Lucien broke through one strand anyway, momentum tearing a gap. Darius moved. He crossed the boundary at Alara's shout, shifted mid-stride and collided with Lucien in a crash of muscle and stone. They rolled, snapped, drove each other across the slab in brutal choreography that stayed terrifyingly precise. Not frenzy, warcraft. Alara backed 2 paces, hands on the carved seam, and kept the boundary alive while they fought, blood dripping into ancient runes that answered her line. Lucien twisted under Darius's weight, raked free, and came for Alara again, with jaws wide. She did not retreat. She slammed her bloodied hand flat to the central glyph and shouted the final command her mother had once taught by Winter Lamp, never expecting it to decide a kingdom. Silver fire erupted from the ring like chains made of moonlight. It wrapped Lucien's forelegs, then his hindquarters, pinning him long enough for Darius to hit him from the side and drive him to the stone. Darius shifted back to human form in a breath. One forearm braced across Lucien's chest, holding him down as the chains tightened. Lucien spat, half-shifted, voice shredded but still venomous. You are a widow playing queen. Alara stepped forward until his breath struck her boots. I buried one life. I will not bury another for your hunger. She took the ritual blade in both hands and drove it down into the hollow beneath his ribs where the chain light marked true. Lucian jerked once, snarled, then went still as the silver fire consumed itself and faded. Silence hit the clearing like a dropped curtain. Then sound returned in fragments. Wolves panting, armor settling, one of Lucian's captains throwing down his weapon, another kneeling outright. Ivor's voice cut through, commanding Stormborn ranks to disarm under witness law. On Valewood's side, no one cheered. They watched Alara standing over the body of the man who had tried to erase her, blood on her hand, moon shadow lifting from her face. Darius rose slowly and turned toward both armies, chest heaving, gaze fierce and clear. He did not claim the kill. He did not need to. Every eye had seen who ended the war. Smoke drifted low across the stone circle while wolves from both sides lowered their weapons and stared at Alara as if seeing her for the first time. Darius stood beside her, blood on his forearm, chest rising hard, and gave orders without lifting his voice. Ivor disarmed Stormborn captains under witness law. Senna's aides carried the injured from both ranks, and Tal arrived with 2 scribes, inkboards strapped to their chests, recording names, confessions, and surrendered seals while the eclipse light thinned. When Alara's knees finally trembled, Darius touched her wrist lightly and waited. She nodded. He guided her to the old temple built into the hill above the circle, where moon-carved pillars held dawn in their grooves, and battle noise faded to a distant murmur. Inside, elders, captains, and neutral witnesses formed a half-ring. No one spoke over him when he faced them. The bond recognized in my hall was not claimed in private, Darius said. It will not be sealed in shadow. She will choose in witness or not at all. His gaze moved to Alara, and everything in him that had been war turned precise and reverent. Ilara Stoneheart, do you consent to be marked as my mate, with equal right to refuse, to stop, or to answer in your own way? The question struck through her exhaustion with clean force. Consent, again. Not assumed, not taken. She felt the child shift beneath her palm and thought of fire, ash, the smokehouse door, Mara's forehead against hers, Caden's laugh at the hearth, and this man who had slept outside her chamber in wolf form so she could hear steady breath through wood. Grief did not vanish. It stood beside her, changed from blade to scar. She lifted her chin. Yes, she said, clear enough for every witness. I consent. A breath moved through the room, not surprise now, but recognition. Darius stepped closer, close enough that she caught rain and iron and cedar on his skin. Say stop, and I stop, he murmured. She answered by placing her hand at the back of his neck and guiding him down. He bared his teeth at the junction of her neck and shoulder, paused for one last heartbeat, then bit. Pain flashed sharp and bright, then broke open into heat that poured through her in widening rings, not erasing hurt, but reorganizing it, as if every fractured piece inside her had been found and named. Gold warmth threaded with silver moved from the mark into her chest, down her arms, through her spine, and settled beneath her ribs where fear had lived for months. Her breath shook. His hold stayed controlled, steady, the bite an oath rather than conquest. Mine, he whispered against her skin, voice rough with emotion he did not hide. Alara's fingers tightened in his hair. The word rose from somewhere deeper than pride or panic. Yours, she whispered back, and the bond answered with a low, living hum that wrapped around her pulse and the child's quick heartbeat together. When he released, his mouth softened over the mark in a brief, careful press. He did not step back. He offered her his shoulder, turning so the thick muscle above his collarbone was bare, marked already by old scars and faint rune lines glowing amber under skin. Your choice, he said, Alara let herself look at him fully, at the power he could have used and did not, at the man who kept putting decisions in her hands and calling that strength. She leaned in and bit his shoulder hard enough to mark, tasting salt and iron. His breath punched out, half growl, half relief, and she felt the answering surge arc through the bond, stronger now, reciprocal, unmistakably equal. Mine, she said against him. His hand came to the back of her head, gentle, anchoring. Yours. Mate, they said together, and the word landed like a key in a lock. The temple's moonstones lit in a soft sweep from floor to arch, reacting to the completed bond. Witnesses bowed their heads. Senna wiped at her eyes without embarrassment. Ivor thumped his fist to his chest. Even Isel, severe and difficult, lowered her chin in formal acknowledgement. Darius drew Alara into his arms with deliberate care around her belly, and she let herself lean. The bond settled. No longer a raw wire, now a steady current she could breathe with. Through it came impressions, not words, his fierce protectiveness, his restraint, his fear of failing her, his acceptance of the child as part of his own future. She sent back what she could, still uneven but true. Grief remembered, trust chosen, and a stubborn, rising tenderness that no longer felt like betrayal. He rested his forehead against hers. Seen in shadow, he whispered. Chosen in light, she answered. By noon, the great hall held tribunal instead of war council. Branth stood in irons between two guards, jaw set, while Tal read the evidence chain in exact order. Stormborn gold discs seized from the satchel, denunciation letters with matching wax composition, the forged confession with copied seal pressure, Lucian's blood-sealed coercion letter, and the obsidian vial containing powdered moon rune from the destroyed memory stone. At Alara's request, Tal also logged the fragments of all 3 memory stones, 2 shattered by her hand at the circle, 1 pulverized by Lucian, catalogued and sealed in the archive as exhausted evidence, with witness signatures from 6 clans. Then Stoneheart's delegation was brought in under guard, 2 judges, 3 elders, and Brannick, whose ringed hand had appeared in Caden's recovered projection. He did not meet Alara's eyes until Tal recited Mara's sworn statement. Mara stood at the rail alive, mud still on her boots from extraction, shoulders squared like a woman done apologizing for surviving. Under witness law and with Lucian dead, Stoneheart could not keep the lie. Judge Heron spoke the retraction with a shaking voice. The death right naming Alara Stoneheart deceased is void. Her name stands living in all records. He swallowed and continued. Her inheritance from Caden Stoneheart is restored. Reparations in grain, silver, and river access are owed for unlawful seizure. Alara listened, then answered from Darius's right hand, where she now stood by right, not exception. I accept reparations. I refuse blood vengeance. You will instead ratify sanctuary reform. No widow, no child, and no claimant under active threat may be bartered, erased, or transferred as war payment. Violation triggers immediate treaty sanctions and crown intervention. Isel rose first. Seconded. Ivor seconded after her. The motion carried across the hall, clan by clan, until even reluctant voices joined rather than be recorded against it. Branth was stripped of office and sentenced to life labor in the northern quarries under oath chain. Brannick and complicit Stoneheart elders were remanded for high tribunal. The captain who had once muttered about bloodline bowed to Alara in open court and accepted censure duty at the asylum gate for 1 year, learning each petitioner's name before entry. At moonrise, the coronation fire was lit in the upper court. No banners burned. Border beacons that had signaled war were extinguished one by one along the ridge, each darkening point visible from the fortress wall like stars choosing rest. Rival clan leaders knelt and swore revised treaty terms. Darius placed the Valewood crescent crown on Alara's head, then set his hand over hers on the law tablet. Luna and co-ruler, Tal proclaimed, voice carrying over stone and wind. Authority over asylum, treaty, and succession, equal and binding. Darius turned to the court. Her child stands protected heir of this realm. No one challenged it. Later, after the formal vows and the last signature dried, Ilara found a quiet balcony above the sleeping terraces. The mountain air was cold and clean. Darius came up behind her, wrapped his cloak around both of them, and she eased back against his chest, listening to the matched rhythm of his heart and the calm hum of the bond. Below, the gate stayed open for caravans again. Inside, Mara laughed with Senna over a shared cup. In the inner yard, wolves from 3 clans traded watch duty without reaching for weapons. Ilara tilted her face to the full moon and laughed softly, the sound small and astonished and real, while Darius held her, and the night held steady around them.